What's going on, people? What's going on? This is Eli Wananda. My name is Eli Wananda, and you are watching We Are Reading. We Are Reading, as you may know, but if you don't know, I'm going to tell you now. We Are Reading is a weekly series of live streams where I sit here and give you some reflections that I have on books which I've been reading, which I think are powerful and important for us as African people. Just bear with me one moment, please. So yes. Welcome to We Are Reading. Today we are going to be going through an excellent book, really good book called Yurugu. This is Yurugu by Marimba Ani. The subtitle of the book is a good subtitle. It's an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. And we finished it now. The conclusion was only about 30 pages or something like that. So it's a very short section. And so hopefully today's session shouldn't be a very long one. Basically, what I'm going to do in this session today is I'm going to give my overall thoughts of the book as a whole and pull out one or two of the key kind of themes that I think are most important for us as African people to take forward and to keep in mind from Yurugu. And after that, we'll talk a little bit about Yurugu. I'll give my overview of the book, and I'll also give a little bit of a trailer for the forthcoming books we're going to be doing. So the next book we're going to do is this very small book called Kindezi. So I don't know how to get Kindezi, The Congo Art of Babysitting by Bunseki Fukiao and Lukonda Wamba, two Congolese writers, I believe. And then we're going to spend a couple of sessions on this book, which is called The Spirit of Intimacy by Sobon Fusome from Burkina Faso, I believe, the Dagara people in Burkina Faso. So that's going to be the plan for today. Like I said, it should be a fairly short session today, if I'm honest, because we haven't got anything new to cover from Yurugu. So yeah, that's the plan. So I hope everyone's well wherever you are. Habari gani, how is life treating you? Hope life is treating you well and all that good stuff. And do make sure that you subscribe as well to the channel while we're here. Do make sure you like the video, and then let's get started. So Yurugu is basically 500 odd, nearly 600 pages of a sustained examination and critique of the way in which Europeans think. And more specifically, it's a sustained treatment and critique of the forms of thought that they have, the way they see the world, the way that they conceptualize the world, their philosophy, the ideological seeds of their philosophy. And also it's a critique or a revelation, really, probably is the better word, of the drive, the energetic drive of Europeans, by which she means Wazungu. She's not just talking about people who were born or raised in the continent of Europe. She's talking about Wazungu all over the world, and she's talking not necessarily on the individual level. What she's talking about is on a, globally speaking, culturally speaking, this is how the European mind thinks. This is how the European, I suppose, body acts. I suppose might be a good way of putting it. And she does a tremendous job of critiquing European thought. One thing I'd say is that I would like to see a similar book or a similar kind of work being done to analyze other people. So one of the comments that's come up previously in our streams is, do these things apply to say, Chinese or South Asians or whatever, or does it only apply to Europeans? And as I'm going to explain in a minute, I think that while what Marimba Ani talks about, of course, is very specific to Europeans, the European diaspora as well, but there are elements, particularly when she's talking about the origins of the European asili, cultural ideological seed, when she's talking about the origins of the Europeans and considering the different theories about why it is that they act the way that they do, which connects to different theories about where they come from. I think in that sense, that's where I would like to look a little bit more to see, okay, well, how does the origins of the Europeans, how that particular, Caucasus Mountains origin of the Europeans, if you want to call it that, how does that also maybe affect some of the, particularly the Arabs and Persians and, if you want to call them, Hindi people or whatever you want to call them? That I'd be quite interested to look at a little bit into that side of things. But nevertheless, Marimba Ani, she's done an excellent job in this book. When I read the introduction to the book, or from Baba John Henrik Clarke, he said he made a comment. He made a very accurate comment at the beginning of the book, which, having read the book all the way through, I know that he's right. He said in his introduction, he said, in order to understand the new information and revelations in this book, the readers might have to approach it as carefully as the writer has. This will be an intellectual experience that has its own reward. And that was in April 1992, 30 years ago. And he's right. He really is right. Yurugu is not a book, frankly, it's not even suited to doing a chapter a week. That's how deep this book is. I feel, particularly as we got really into it, kind of to the last few chapters, it really became clear to me that I was rush reading so that I could have something to talk about in the live stream. It's not a book like that. When we did the previous book, which was The Invention of Women by Oyirunke Oyewumi, if you want to go through those sessions, I'm sorry. But when we did this previous book, The Invention of Women, I found it much easier to go through, much easier to kind of get through each chapter. It's a much shorter book, it's only 150 odd pages. And when a book is short, obviously the writer has got much less time to get into real detail on the topics that she's covering. But Mama Marimba Ani had nearly 600 pages and she goes deep. And I will reread this book again in future without doubt. And when I do reread it, I'm probably going to be giving myself more like a month to read each chapter and to consider each chapter, because that's how deep she goes. So there's a few things I want to say. So first of all, there's a very clear academic focus to this book. This book, sometimes in our Pan-African circles or Afrocentric circles, Black circles, conscious circles, whatever you want to say, sometimes I've read books where the level of analysis, the level of academic rigor, but by which I mean the extent to which the writers bother to engage with things that other writers have said, or the extent to which sometimes in some of our books, sources are not particularly given in books. There's often not many footnotes, not much of a bibliography and all that sort of stuff. Mama Marimba Ani comes to this book. She brought intellectual rigor to the book. So I'm saying the book finishes on page 570. Then you've got what's this? About 50 pages of notes and references, and then another 10, 15 pages of index. This is a thorough book. And it became very clear to me quite early on that she was writing this with academia in mind, actually. She was writing this, and she says it in chapter 1. She wrote Yurugu to particularly appeal to those Africans and others who have been trained in Euro academia, who've been trained to think like Europeans, who've been trained to perceive the world through European eyes. She wrote this book with them in mind. And there's a portion she writes in her preface, which I think is important, because I like the way that she locates herself in the story. She makes it very clear where she's coming from. She makes it very clear what her background is and what her motivations are. And so I like this. This is XX1. What's that? 2021 of the Roman numerals bit. She says this. She says, "I owe my awakening and growth towards a Pan-African nationalist consciousness to Professor John Henrik Clarke, who allowed some of us as young people working with SNCC, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which the same organization that brought us the likes of Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture, and many others in the 1960s. So Baba Henrik Clarke allowed Marimba Ani, who would have been called Donna Richards at that time, and many other youngsters who were working with SNCC to sit at his, so quoting again, literally sit at his feet in his Brooklyn apartment in 1965-66 and drink of his wisdom and knowledge concerning the history of the Pan-African world. This close contact with Professor Clarke tapped my African center, and I developed a passion for the realization of the Pan-African vision. And I like that, because when I read that, and I said at the time when we did our stream, that immediately, I was like, wow, okay, good. What she's telling us there is that she's not just some person who's just come up with some ideas and wants to tell us some ideas. She is someone who was organizing in the civil rights era. That's the civil rights era we're talking about, the 60s, SNCC, so she would have been organizing, student boycotts, student demonstrations, all this kind of stuff. This is the time when the Black Panther Party was coming up as well. And, Malcolm was there, Martin was there, Fannie Lou Hamer was there, all these people. And then, of course, as she's going to talk about in a minute, she talks about Africa. That was also the time of a groundswell of anti-colonialist liberation struggles and so forth. And so that's where she came from. The 60s, she came up in that period. And then she says that after my experience with SNCC in Mississippi and some travel in the motherland, I began graduate studies in anthropology. That contradiction led to a dissertation meant to uncover the roots of anti-Africanism and European imperialistic consciousness in the discipline of anthropology. The research began what was to become a 20-year sojourn through the bowels of European thought, leading to the conclusions of this work. And lots there, but a key thing that jumped out for me there as I was rereading it was the 20 years thing. And that's what I'm saying about this. This book is not a book to try and rush through in a few weeks. It took Marimba Ani several years of organizing, and then 20 years of entering into the postgraduate world and doing a thesis, getting into the anthropological world and so forth. 20 years it took her to distill all these thoughts into this book. So I say give props to her, give props to Baba John Henrik Clarke and Molefe Kete Asante as well. Now, a large chunk of the book, one of the things that makes this book maybe a little bit difficult to read sometimes is that a large chunk of the book is actually Marimba Ani having a conversation with these European academics, thought leaders, visionaries, ideological, ideologues and all that. She very often she'll go off on a sort of tangent, if you want to call it that, and engage with, oh, here's this person. This particular European scholar said this thing, and Mama Marimba Ani will say, however, and she'll critique it, or she'll discuss it, she'll elaborate. And it's not just rejection as well. One of the things that I really like about this book, and you find this with most serious Pan-African scholarship, is that Mama Marimba Ani is not here just trying to say everything that Europeans come up with is bad and wrong and evil and anti-Black. Not at all. Many, many times in the book, she will quote favorably from European academics. For example, she mentions Carl Jung fairly favorably. She mentions several of these people fairly positively, and I like that, because again, it shows, or it confirms or affirms that she's not trying to be she's being fairly open, let's just say, and she's not trying to just be very, very one-sided and very, very kind of dogmatic about it. That's true. I mean, having said that, she does critique pretty much everything that she quotes, but there are some times where, for example, she will at least recognize the good in some of these people's arguments and build on them. But what she often does, which I like, is that even when she quotes someone like a Carl Jung, the Swiss, Austrian, German psychologist who was a student of what's the guy's name? Student of Freud, Sigmund Freud. She points out some of the contradictions in their thoughts, and she points out quite often how even these slightly switched on European academics, even they still embody and reinforce the asili, which she is critiquing and uncovering. So I quite like that. It does make it a little bit hard to read the book sometimes when she's going into these debates with these people's ideas. However, I think that's what gets back to what I'm saying about this is a book that you really need to take quite a long time reading to be able to absorb all of these things. It's only when you're trying to rush, like I've been trying to rush, that you can find it a little bit difficult and slow down a little bit. So that's the first, my first of about 4 or 5 key takeaways is that it's a very academic book. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I'll probably put this book up there with something like The Blueprint for Black Power by Baba Amos Wilson as some of the, if I was doing an African-centered curriculum, university curriculum or something, this book, certainly Yurugu, would be right up there when it comes to philosophy, because this book is basically a philosophy book. It's about the big ideas. How do Europeans think? How do they conceive the world? What is their concept of knowledge? What's their concept of personhood? And all this sort of stuff. It's a big book, and this would be a foundational book, certainly in any kind of curriculum that I would set up. Peace out to you. Thanks for chiming in, guys. Everything is politics. Always a pleasure to see you. Karibu sana, karibu. Habari za leo, wherever you are. Anyway, you're there. and yeah, brother Oni, pro black perspective. Shout out to you, man. Salama. This brother here, Ndugu anasema Kiswahili kidogo, zaidi ya me, more than me. But yeah, follow this guy, man. Follow him on Twitter as well. Like literally one of the best folks I follow on Twitter. Always something interesting coming from this good brother's mind, if you want to say that. So yeah, peace out, peace to everyone who's watching as well. And let me carry on with my thoughts. What I'll say as well, please do let me know your thoughts as well, overall thoughts. If you want to let me know overall thoughts on Yurugu or things that you'd like to kind of touch on, then obviously do throw them in the comments as well. Now, I wanted to read the incantation of this. I think I'm going to, should I read I think I might read this incantation because I think, should I read it? Maybe I'll read it at the end because I like the incantation. It kind of really brings together everything that she's trying to say in a poetic form, which I really like. It's from this incantation. It's like a poem or affirmation from Kwame Kwei-Armah, I believe, Kobe Kambon. But we'll come back to that. Now, a key point of this book, obviously from the title, the key point of the book purpose of the book is to make Europe and Europeans visible. And that sounds like obviously a bit of an odd thing to say. What do you mean? Are they invisible? Are Europeans invisible? But what I mean is that Mama Marimba Ani goes to very great lengths to show us that much of the things that we consider to just be normal, just the way that humans are, just the way humans think, just, even just the way that we think. I mean, let me go a bit deeper. Some of the things that we think are even pro-Black or Afrocentric, some of those things, and many of, are actually European ideas. They come very specifically from European thinkers, from European history, European concepts of spirituality and all that sort of stuff. And that's what I love. That's one of the main things that I love about the book. So, on page 19, page 19, Mama Marimba Ani writes this. She says, "My chosen field is African-centered cultural science, the reconstruction of a revolutionary African culture." So African-centered cultural science is her chosen field, and she defines that as a reconstruction of a revolutionary African culture. I teach Pan-African studies. The experience convinces me more and more, however, that teaching Pan-African studies well means teaching European studies simultaneously. Interesting. To be truly liberated, African people must come to know the nature of European thought and behavior in order to understand the effect that Europe has had on our ability to think victoriously. We must be able to separate our thought from European thought so as to visualize a future that is not dominated by Europe. This is demanded by an African-centered view because we are Africans and because the future which Europe leads us towards is genocidal. And it's interesting because sometimes, friends and family will say, "Oh yeah, what's this yogi that you're reading all about?" And I'll be like, "You mean Yurugu?" And they'll, "Oh yeah. I've been meaning to get into that. What is that you're doing, Ellie?" And so I'll be like, "Yeah, I'll explain it. It's basically like a critique of European thought and behavior." And it's very rare that anyone's responded by going, "Oh, right, that's really good." It's normally kind of just a glazed eyes, blank stares, like, all right. I'm sure that's very interesting, Ellie, because I get it, because it does sound a bit, why are you studying European thought? What does that even mean? But she breaks down in this book so well. We can't really be seriously thinking about African liberation unless we're understanding the world view and the mindset of the people who are oppressing us. Liberation implies someone is oppressing us. Someone has got us locked down. We need to free ourselves. Yeah. Or who is that person? Who are those people? They're Europeans. People might not want to hear that, but that's who it is mainly. So we need to understand, because as she makes the point, and Amos Wilson makes this point as well. Yes, we will need military power to be able to liberate ourselves and we'll need economic, political, military power to liberate ourselves and to sustain our liberation, our freedom. But if you don't deal with the psychological bondage, if you don't deal with the mental slavery, then you're not going to be able to affect political transformation or you're not going to be able to deploy troops or anything like that. You're not going to be able to free yourself if you're still thinking in ways that you've been taught to think. So that goes without saying. As Baba Steve Biko, I think it was, said that the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed, or are the minds of the oppressed. And that's the point. It doesn't matter, if you give people access to your mind, they don't need to worry too much about your body, getting you, because you will do what they want you to do. One will behave how your enemy wants you to behave if your enemy is controlling the way you think. Let's just put it that way. So that's why this book is so important, to understand where European thought and philosophy and so forth comes from. And she makes a good point, and this is definitely a point that we probably all know, is that Europe seems to disappear, or Europeanness seems to disappear as soon as you critique it. As soon as you critique Europeans, then suddenly, and she says this. She says, when an African, this is on page 19 again. Yeah. When an African-centered critique of Europe is attempted, suddenly it becomes, if not invisible, an evasive entity of uncertain definition and demarcation. So she says, once when I made a comment about the European worldview, a colleague asked me to which of the many worldviews represented in the European tradition I was referring. Though he had praised the tradition consistently, now he argued that it was not uniform, nor did it represent a single reality. But European nationalism, so strong and so pervasive, is created not by diversity, but by the perception of unity. Very important point there, because you will consistently run into Wazungu usually, and also Wazungu-fied Africans who want to tell you that, no, I don't see literally an elder in my family told me the other day, I don't see color. Color doesn't mean anything to me. Whenever someone says color doesn't mean anything to me, translate that as I love whiteness and I don't want to be black. Or I don't want to talk about blackness because, I mean, what could it be? Lots of trauma, lots of suppressed feelings of inferiority or in your face feelings of inferiority and so forth that they do not want to confront. And so they know that as soon as you start talking, as soon as you do start talking about culture and ethnicity and all that sort of stuff, then you're going to have to start talking about Wazungu. You're going to have to start talking about Europeans and what they've done to our people. And you're going to have to start thinking as an African, and your interests are going to have to start aligning with your people, with your African people. Desaline said that, Desaline said, and shout out to you, by the way, family, said they're hoping people forget that they're black. Yeah, they are, bizarrely. And not realizing, the reason they think that might even be possible is that they don't realize the critical importance of race in the European psyche, so yeah, but very often this will happen when you try and critique Europeans, or when you try and critique whiteness, suddenly, oh no, race isn't a thing, but then at the same point, or Europe isn't a thing, there isn't a European worldview. But there is a European worldview when it comes to extolling the virtues of Europe, extolling the virtues of European philosophy, extolling the virtues of the ancient Greeks or the Romans, extolling when it's the good stuff. Yeah, Europe, Rule Britannia. They're all ready for that when it's time to big up themselves and big up Europe and big up Britain or whatever it might be, big up the United States. But as soon as you want to critique them, no. So that's just to say that a book like this is extremely important because it does turn the camera lens round, if you want to say, onto them and say, listen, we're looking at you now, we're studying you. She talks about how certain scholars of I can't remember which one she mentioned. I think was Kwame Koyama one of them. Anyway, some of the scholars she mentioned, one of them calls themselves an Aryanologist because they devote a lot of their time to studying the Aryan people, i.e. Europeans. So very important thing to do. Now, again, I'm just going through some of the key kind of main takeaways from the overall book itself. And one of the most important points, obviously, in the book is this concept of asili. Asili is a Kiswahili word for seed, I believe. And it's a good word, isn't it? Seed. The seed, this term asili, as Marimba Ani explains it in the glossary, asili is the logos of a culture, within which its various aspects cohere. It is the developmental germ or the seed of a culture. It is the cultural essence, the ideological core, the matrix of a cultural entity which must be identified in order to make sense of the collective creations of its members. So it's kind of talking about the birth of a culture, the foundational ideological seed of a culture. And then, and her point is that you need to be able to identify that in order to then make sense of everything it is that these people do who are of that culture. And then there are two other concepts which are critically important and which are critical to her analysis, let's just say. One is utamawazo and one is utamaroho. They're both Kiswahili derived words, although I'm not sure. It might be a little bit like some of the Kwanzaa words. Some of those words in Kwanzaa for the days they're sort of like, they're Kiswahili terms, but they're creative Kiswahili terms. They've been adapted to the purposes of the in that case, the Kwanzaa celebrations and so forth. But I do know that wazo, I believe that term means something like power, ability. I don't know. But anyway, utamawazo is culturally structured thought. And in Marimba Ani's words, it is the way in which cognition, that is thought, is determined by a cultural asili. It is the way in which the thought of members of a culture must be patterned if the asili is to be fulfilled. And this is something that probably Mama Marimba Ani spends most of the book talking about, is that the culturally structured thought. And again, that's talking about those fancy words like ontology, what do Europeans think is out there in the world, what exists in the world. Epistemology, how do Europeans learn, how do they think how do they obtain knowledge of something, how do they think that knowledge is obtained, all these things. Aesthetics as well somewhat comes into that, and so forth. But so you've got the sort of the way in which the Europeans think, that's Utama Wazo. Then you've got Utama Rojo, and I know Rojo is heart or spirit in Kiswahili. Utama Rojo is the vital force of a culture, set in motion by the asili. It is the thrust or energy source of a culture, that which gives its emotional tone and motivates the collective behavior of its members. Both the Utama Wazo and the Utama Rojo are born out of the asili and in turn affirm it. They should not be thought of as distinct from the asili, but as its manifestations. And this concept, this asili concept, asili, ideological seed, Utama Wazo, the culturally structured thought, and Utama Rojo, the energetic drive of a people, that concept there is what it, is how she proposes it is possible to be able to look at the bewildering diversity of forms of behavior and thought that we are presented with in a European world and make sense of it. She speaks a lot about the importance of finding interrelatedness, interrelatedness between all the different things, whether it be, for example, European aesthetics, for example. She looks at the interrelatedness between how Europeans perceive and conceive of aesthetics and the relationship between that and European aggression towards others, and the relationship between that and European concepts of religion and spirit and European concepts. She's all about finding those interconnections so that, and it's a great, maybe she's brainwashed me, I don't know, but I'm constantly doing this nowadays. Someone might bring up some thing and I'll say, well, yeah, this makes sense because actually in this Western world, we're taught to think of, for example, matter as being, or thinking of the universe as being matter only, and there's no spirit in matter. So they can, for example, happily destroy the environment because they have desacralized it. These are all terms that Mama Marimba Ani talks about. Desacralize the cosmos by meaning they've taken the sacred out of it and they just consider the cosmos to be just a bunch of matter waiting to be dominated and controlled and used. So I do think that asili concept is very, very important. I think when I reread the book, I will read it a bit slower so that I can understand that a little bit more, because there were times I kind of maybe missed some of the connections that she was making with some of the things. But anyway, that asili concept drives the whole book forward. And yeah, so that's a key thing. And at the end of this, when I finish my summary of the book, I will show an image from the book, which I think does really well to kind of bring everything together, because she talks about quite a wide range of the topics in the 10 chapters of the book. But I do think the asili concept, this image that I'll show you in a bit, in about 10-15 minutes, I think will be really helpful in that regard. Now, going into the Utama Wazo and Utama Rojo a little bit, I'm not going to explain them in detail, but I think the few things we need to do when we're summarizing this book is to give a slight definition of the European asili. So an important section for this, I think. So this section of my reflections, I suppose you might call it the uniqueness of European cultural thought and behavior. So I've just said that Mama Marimba Ani's job is to demonstrate the uniqueness of European thought and behavior. And so this is how she characterizes it. Page 29 is an important section. This is right at the start of chapter 2, I think. And Mama Marimba Ani writes this. This is to do with the the utamawazo, the view of the world, and this is the seed of why they view the world the way they do, or how they view it. And it says this: the African worldview and the worldviews of other people who are not of European origin all appear to have certain themes in common. The universe to which they relate is sacred in origin, is organic, and is a true cosmos. Human beings are part of the cosmos and as such relate intimately with other cosmic beings. Knowledge of the universe comes through relationship with it and through perception of spirit in matter. The universe is one. Spheres are joined because of a single unifying force that pervades all being. You might call that Untu. Meaningful reality issues from this force. And she says, these worldviews are reasonable, but not rationalistic, complex, yet lived. They tend to be expressed through a logic of metaphor and complex symbolism. Rob the universe of its richness, deny the significance of the symbolic, simplify phenomena until it becomes mere object and you have a knowable quantity. Here begins and ends the European epistemological mode. And that is the key takeaway of the book, is that the European ideology, European view of the world is one which is all about the denial of spirit. It's all about separation from the cosmos. It's all about separation even from one's own emotions. So, and that's very, very different from the world, the kind of worldview or world sense that Mama Marimba Ani has just said there, which is all about the cosmos, connecting with other cosmic beings, spirit in matter, perceiving spirit in everything, perceiving the relationship between all things based on that spiritual connection. So Mama Marimba Ani talks a lot about Plato, because she says that Plato is the one who didn't necessarily invent some of what I'm about to say, but he certainly did make it. He was the first one really to codify it. And he really set the precedent. People who came after him kept referring back to him basically to build up this worldview, this European worldview. So just to summarize Plato's views as relating to Mama Marimba Ani's argument, she argues that Plato came up with this concept of self, which is basically the mind. And this is the self this is a new concept of person that was separate from everything, separate from the cosmos, separate from everything else, everything else becomes objectified. All other people, all other creatures, all other elements of the universe are now object, which are not in relationship. Plato actually argues, and his successors argue forcefully, that if you have any kind of relationship with something, then you are weakened. You are controlled by that thing. I think that's the argument. And so it's very important to be completely separate from any kind of relationship with other people, other beings, the universe, and so forth. Plato even called, this mind, this self, which is the mind, was even separate from one's own body, fleshly passions, as Plato might say it, separate from our own flesh, separate from emotions, separate from feelings. All those kinds of things are seen as weakness. If once emotions come in, opinions and all this sort of stuff, the idea is that, listen, the only way you can, all that sort of stuff is not true knowledge, basically. Feelings, emotions, inclinations, intuitions, or whatever. That's just opinions. That's not truth. True knowledge is true. And the only way that you can perceive truth is through the mind. And the only way you can perceive truth with the mind is through rationalistic inquiry, not through relationship, not through, I don't know what else you might say, not through anything physical or anything like that. No, it's all through rational inquiry to be able to perceive the truth, which is completely abstract. Truth is abstract in this world view. So I think Plato kind of had this idea that there was like some abstract truths that are just somewhere. Where did he say that? I don't know where he said they were, but there was abstract truths somewhere. And the only way you can find them is through the mind, not through the body, not through the flesh, not through any of that sort of stuff. not through relationship, not through culture, none of that sort of stuff. The idea is anyway. No. It's all through abstraction. Sorry, and then what have I got here? So the self is a thinking subject, not a cosmic being. It's separate from the universe. And then, as I said, dividing up the self into reason, which is the higher. Reason is higher. Emotion and appetite and all that sort of stuff is lower. And then, did I talk about the dichotomies? I didn't hear, but from that kind of from that separation between reason and emotion comes a whole load of other dichotomies, a whole load of other binaries, if you might say. So, for example, men and women. Men are identified with the mind, women are identified with the body. Thus, for these ancient Greeks in ancient times, women had no role to play whatsoever in democracy. Democracy was only for the men, because men are superior to women, according to them. Women, we read quotes from certain of them where women are said to be basically, almost like subhuman, not really human, not rational. And so, of course, they can't be the rulers in the republic that Plato is so keen to create. Just to say as well, one of the points that Mama Marimba Ani makes is that Plato wasn't just an abstract philosopher guy with abstract ideas. He wanted to create. He had the idea of a particular kind of state that he wanted to create. He laid it out in the Republic, and in this state, it would be the philosophers who would rule everybody else, because philosophers are the ones who are in touch with abstract truth, and they would rule the rest of the people who weren't. Then you have, of course, and Mama Marimba Ani goes into this with, particularly when she talks about religion. Then you have a load of dichotomies between the Greek and the barbarians, the Christians and the heathens, the civilized, the uncivilized. And it goes through our history: the developed, the underdeveloped, the civilized, again, the barbarians. All these dichotomies. Of course, on the good side, if you want to say, of the dichotomies are always European men. They're always on the good side. And on the bad side, let's just say, is always non-Europeans and females. So there's a constant dichotomy. And of course, when we that's not new, because we know that we're aware of the fact that that's how, and that dichotomization of everything permeates through all the way through their view of the world, through their view of the global world, through their politics, through their military endeavors, and so on and so forth. Always couched in these terms of civilized, uncivilized, democratic, tyrannical. All these kinds of things. They love dichotomizing and putting themselves on the good side of the dichotomy, if you want to say. And the thing with these dichotomies as well, it's not a complementarity of, for example, male female. Male female. This is just facts of nature. There are males, there are females. No culture anywhere ignores that. But whereas when we discussed Oyeronka Oyewumi's book, The Invention of Women, she talks about in Yoruba culture how, yes, they understood that there were obinrin and okunrin, females and males. However, the way that wasn't okunrin are better than obinrin. It wasn't okunrin must dominate okun. It wasn't that males in Yoruba culture pre-colonial. It wasn't that males should dominate women because males are better than women, as it was in European culture, because it wasn't that. It was a complementarity, harm, working together and so on. For the European Utamawazo, it absolutely was about separation from and conflict, like necessary conflict between the reason and emotion. Conflict, the reason must dominate the emotion. The civilized must dominate the uncivilized. The white must dominate the black, and so on and so forth in their dichotomies. And of course, that is so. That's it. Basically, that whole objectification, and then the war between the self and everything else. That basically is one of the main things that gave Europeans throughout history the impetus for the aggression that they've shown consistently throughout their history. And so that's really important. A lot of the book, as we're showing it, I'll show when I look at that image shortly. A lot of the book basically is all about that. When you look at art, when you look at politics, when you look at religion, you know, basically you keep seeing this, you know, being worked out over and over again. And then the other, so that's the Última Waza in a nutshell. The other thing is the Último Rojo, and this is a bit similar to it to probably explain. The Último Rojo is basically the energetic drive of Europeans, and that energetic drive of Europeans is all about, well, I suppose it is similar. These are related. Último Rojo and Último Waza are interrelated. The Último Rojo is all about domination. It's all about expansion. It's all about insecurity, restlessness, you know, domination, and so forth. They have over the years selected for, if you want to say it's a natural selection thing, they've selected for that, or they've promoted that aggression, domination, expansion, you know. And this is most clearly seen. I felt that, for me personally, I think that the chapter that Mama Marimba Ani talked about, progress, was where this was really, really well laid out. I believe it's chapter 8. She talks about how the European idea of progress, or which we think of as just the idea of progress, we think that progress is just this universal thing. Mama Ani points out that no, the European idea of progress is very different to, it's very unique, and it's an idea of progress that is basically, it's not going anywhere in particular. There isn't some golden age of that European culture wants to take us all to, and then after that it will all be fine, we can chill. No, it's just progress for the sake of progress. It's movement for the sake of movement. It's keeping people, so we have capitalism, for example, and, you know, which keeps people running on a treadmill forever. You can never get anywhere in this idea of progress. People are inculcated with this idea of progress. They're actually inculcated, or to use I don't know why I use such a long word, but that people are motivated to be fearful, and be fearful of the future, which never comes, but they're scared of it anyway. And it's just constantly, sometimes half the time, maybe when you watch this video on YouTube, you know, you have to skip through these adverts, and half the adverts I watch are about, are you between 30 and 45? Do you have debts that you can't pay? Well, there's a new government scheme that means that you can, or do you want to know how I made $90,000 in 4 hours using a new AI bot? And, you know, it's all this kind of crap. It's constant. We're constantly getting bombarded with fear, 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 fear. You're not worthy. You're not worthy. There's even an advert, one of the adverts in the UK here, which says something like, your life is good. Yes, don't worry. But your life could be better if you buy this. You know, it's like they come out and just say, listen, yes, we're trying to tell you that your life isn't, it's fine, but it could be better, basically. That's marketing, isn't it? That's advertising. Constantly creating needs in us to be filled, which mainly have nothing to do with food, clothes, and shelter. It's just all to do with just new production, growth for the sake of growth, progress for the sake of progress, progress for the sake of progress, rather. And that's the European Último Rojo, the drive, the expansionism. And she says that expansionism is a key element of the European Último Rojo, and this then leads to one of the main other things that I wanted that jumped out at me about this book, is with regard to this whole expansionism. Why are Europeans so expansionistic? What is that all about? Why? She doesn't spend a long time talking about this. I think this is probably an area that I would like to spend a bit more time getting into. But Mama Marimba Ani, basically, she talks about Freud. She goes into Freud, or some guy who was Freudian, and considers various different theories. But she very clearly is, back then she was, and I think she'll be the same now, she's very clearly inclined toward the ideas of, first of all, Chekanta Diop and his two cradle theory. Then Francis Cress Welsing's, I don't know, is it melanin deficiency theory? I think it's called. the fear of a black planet that that Mama Frances Cress Welsing talked about, and also Dr. Richard King's black dot idea. And I'm going to read some of these because I really loved this section of the book. So again, we're trying to get into the why are Europeans so expansionistic, and also this kind of does also help to explain why the separation from the cosmos. Why is that so important for them? Why is it so important for them to consider the self to be completely separate from the cosmos? Well, first of all, Sheikh Anta Diop, Baba Sheikh Anta Diop, another person I must probably get some of his books on our reading list. He talks about the two cradle theory, and this is a theory that there are two main matrices or birthplaces of cultures. There's one which is the northern, if you want to say, the sort of Asiatic birthplace, and then there's the sort of African birthplace, or the birthplace that is the African. We as Africans, our cradle is different to the cradle of Europeans. And Sheikh Anta Diop argues that for the Indo-Europeans, the first Indo-Europeans, they obviously came out of the Eurasian steppes, and they were nomadic because of the nature of the environment. They were very militaristic, patriarchal, monogamous, fire worshipping, militaristic. They had the concept of a god, a sky father type god, very brutal and violent, and needed them to continuously satiate him with blood sacrifices and murderous rampages across, against other people. One of the things he argues as well is that women are seen as a burden by these nomadic, aggressive people who come out of this cold, harsh environment. Whereas in other culture, in the other cradle, the southern cradle, I think you might call it, and apologies if I'm mischaracterizing Diop's works here, but the other cradle, because of the environment that was more conducive to human life, basically, we developed cultures that were more communalistic, all about sharing, connection with the cosmos, connection with nature, and so on and so forth. Then in chapter 8, she talks about this, and she makes the point that you can only really understand why Europeans are so hell-bent on power and dominations by using non-European worldviews. You can't use a European worldview, particularly their rhetorical ethic, because you just won't be able to make sense of it. And then she brings up Frances Cress Welsing quite a few times, and her psychoanalytic approach, which basically argues that they are the way that they are because they are fearful of black people, because black people have more melanin. But then we get to Richard King, and I want to read this again because I just feel good when I read this. This is something that might make me want to read the Black Dot book by Richard King. Anyway, on page 468, again, we're talking about why are they like this. Mama Marimba Ani says, King argues that blackness or carbon is life and is therefore divine. He says that ancient Africans understood this and called themselves by various names meaning black, such as Kemites, people of the black earth, from which the Greeks developed the word chemistry and the Arabs alchemy. And that thing there is like, oh God, I really need to study that, and learn more about that. Recognizing the special significance of their blackness, which far transcended the color of the skin, according to King, these ancient scientists studied the workings of their own minds, which they understood as being identified with their entire bodies. So much for the mind-body split, so basic to European thought. This is what Frankfurt describes negatively as cosmic thought. According to King, the ancient Africans studied themselves until they came to understand the relationship of blackness to spirituality and inner vision, the higher levels of understanding on which synthesis occurs. For them, blackness represented the divine. In his series of works entitled The Black Dot, King sorry, I'll tell you why I'm laughing in a second. In a series of works entitled The Black Dot, King supports this contention with an impressive array of references to ancient Kemetic texts and symbolic images, and to a host of other theorists and historians. What did these early advanced scientists discover? And then here's a quote from Richard King now. These original titans found that all life came from a black seed. Life was black seed. All life was rooted in blackness. All things possessed a memory of their collective ancestors. Blackness, the universal solvent of all, was seen as the one reality from which spun the threads of the loom of life. All colours, all vibrational energies were but a shade of black. Black was the colour of the night sky, primeval ocean of outer space, birthplace and womb of the planets, stars and galaxies of the universe. Black holes were found at the centre of our own galaxy and countless other galaxies. Black was the colour of carbon, the key atom found in all living matter of our world. Carbon atoms linked together to form black melanin, the first chemical that could capture light and reproduce itself, the chemical key to life. And the brain itself was found to be centered around black neuromelanin. Inner vision, intuition, creative genius, and spiritual illumination were all found to be dependent upon pineal gland blood-borne chemical messengers that controlled skin color and opened the hidden door to the darkness of the collective unconscious mind, allowing the ancient priest scientists to visualize knowledge from the timeless collective unconscious memory banks of the mind. Indeed, the black dot was found to be the hidden doorway to universal knowledge of the past, present, and future. So there you go. That's the significance and the importance of blackness. And the ancients, our ancients, understood this, and this is what you see when you look at the Medunetta, when you look at the concepts of the Kamal, the Kemites, the Chemi. When you look at their concepts and the way they looked at the world, they understood all these things. They understood the deep, deep, deep significance of blackness and melanin. But then the question comes that obviously going back to Cheikh Anta Diop's two cradle theory, in the north there, in that northern cradle, where sun was, the life was hard, living was not easy, and they were starved of sun. And so over time, due to natural selection, perhaps, or due to some other reason, these people became melanin deficient or were melanin deficient. Fascinating area to go into as to how that all happened. But basically, they were melanin deficient. They had much less melanin, not just in their skin, but also in their brains and other parts of the bodies. As I think science does kind of suggest that that is the case. I know that science does, from my study anyway of melanin, I know that there, I believe that there, black people have more melanin in our inner ears, by the way, which isn't just this bit, inner ears all the way down inside there, we have more melanin in there, I believe the science suggests that we have more neuromelanin, melanin in the brains, and so on and so forth. So it's that depletion of melanin is where Mama Marimba Ani, I think, is leaning towards to explain the European aggression and so on. She says, even from the little that we know about melanin, we can assume that there were other side effects as well. So apart from the skin thing and the burning and all that sort of stuff, for melanin does not only affect the skin. In King's view, with less melanin, we could expect an overall lower level of nervous system integration, less activity of the pineal gland, and therefore greater instance of pineal calcification. This in turn might limit access to right brain functions associated with the pineal gland. For example, the development of intuitiveness, holistic or global thinking, the ability to synthesize mentally, and ability to comprehend spiritual truths. The comparative lack of melanin in the melanocytes, for all human beings must produce melanin, contrary to Welsing's implications, would render them less capable of understanding their emotional life. In King's view, this, in combination with the demands of harsh environmental conditions, caused the intensification of left brain functions, which are cause and effect oriented, and it cut off the unconscious as a source of knowledge. This would account for a materialistic worldview, the emphasis on technology, and an inability to get beyond lineal concepts. It would also account for intensely destructive behaviors on a cultural level stemming from the need for control, power, and aggressiveness. For King, Melanin and the pineal gland are the keys to a deeper spiritual consciousness on which level human beings can integrate their understanding and knowledge to reach metaphysical truths that unlock the doors of the dark unconscious. Last sentence, bringing with it an emotional and psychological sense of security, a oneness with self, and inner peace. So that was that's kind of, we talked about the asili. We understand the utamawazo, the culturally structured thought, the utamaroho, the energetic drive. And now I think that section, chapter 8, very, very important, because it's kind of, if we're talking about the asili being a seed, then this conversation that we're having here about the two cradle theory would be the soil in which the seed grew in. Do you see what I did there? But basically, that's kind of how I see it. It's like, yeah, the seed, the asili, I get it. You've defined the asili. Great. But now we need to understand where that asili actually came from, where it grew from. And this is the context. This is the environmental context in which the European ideology kind of was born in. And those are some of the environmental factors which went into developing this asili. Environmental meaning, yes, also the physical environment, the harsh climate, the mountains and so forth in Eurasia, but also biological environment, meaning this, the biological environment. So Mama Marimba Ani talks about us as biocultural beings. And that's, again, I love that, because there's definitely something there about how our bodies, everyone's bodies, every person's body, I suppose every entity's body has an impact on how they view the world, how they think, how they act, how they behave. There's no point running around and pretending that. I suppose one example might be music, rhythm. It's the obvious example, isn't it? It just so happens that the average European person, the average British person, at least anyway, white Americans seem to be more in rhythm than white British people. Maybe it's the contact they've had for quite a while with Africans there. But the predilection toward rhythm, the predilection, the leaning towards, the emphasis on dance, on interconnectivity, on polyphonic rhythms. I've been listening to a lot of East African classic Zilla Zopendwa music, East African guitar music, and all African guitar. If you listen to African guitars and compare it with like what you might hear on some average European rock song, it's just a completely different world. The African guitars are weaving patterns. They're plucking, and they're plucking patterns rather than which is what you hear in Euro rock, let's just say. And that's the kind of, maybe music is probably the most obvious place where we can see that kind of leaning towards interconnectivity, leaning towards rhythm, as opposed to wanting to dominate, and as opposed to the linearity which is so prevalent in European thought, the linear conceptualizations of time, where it's just all going this one direction, everything's going in this one direction, unilinear concept of time versus our concept of times that we have in first world cultures and majority world cultures, which are much more cyclical. And two things to say there. I didn't put this in my notes. I've nearly finished, by the way. But two things to say there is that with regard to the concept of time, Mama Ani tells us very clearly that, first of all, having a more cyclical concept of time gives you a sense of security that you can't have when you share that European unilinear concept of time, because the unilinear concept of time, it's just this line that's just going, and you've got to keep up with it, and you don't know where it's going. Particularly, it's the future. It's just deep, far in. You'll never get to the future. The future is never here, and that's how they basically order existence. That's how they order their societies, on the basis of this linearity, if that makes sense. Whereas the cyclical concept of time gives you more of an assuredness that, I don't need to fear death, actually, for example. Why fear death? Life and sorry, I should have quoted from it. There was a passage I was reading. She talks about how, life, death are basically, it's an incantation. Yes, I'm going to finish with the incantation in a minute. There's something in that incantation on the lines of death and life are basically two partners, working together. They're just two 2 points on a circle, if you want to say that we journey through. And the other thing as well, sorry, is that in the European asili, in European Utomawazo, there's no time, there's no sacred time. You can't access sacred time. Actually, there's not even really a concept of sacred time. Whereas in African and other majority world cultures, you experience sacred time all the time. You know, you experience it through transcendent, you know, through dance, through songs, through spirituals, through not spiritual, ritual, through rituals, through you know, all these things. And Mama, I know, sorry. Let me read it. She explains it better. In the conclusion, she says that maybe I won't read it, but basically she says that this fear of spirituality. Yeah, she talks about how the Europeans are basically like terrified of spirituality because they've denied spirit, but they get that spirit does exist, but they're terrified of it. And she says that they must pretend that these phenomena, i.e., spiritual phenomena, do not exist, and therefore are embarrassed by their manifestations. This, for instance, is why African ritual has a tendency to make Europeans uncomfortable or causes them to overreact. Okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah, so that's the thing, and it's funny when she said that. I must admit, the European in me, sadly, because you know my head is raised here in Europe. I feel a little bit like when I see some of these rituals and stuff, and they've got African rituals. Unfortunately, as conscious and Pan-African as I am, there's still a deep down in me like, what's going on here? Why are they? Because Anyway, the point there is that. Mama Marimba Ani breaks down how we experience sacred time through our rituals, through our manifestations, our spiritual practices that we do, but they can't because of their asili. Interesting where they're coming into context with melanin. Zizo, were you finished? Peace out to you, by the way, my family. I wasn't sure if you'd finished that comment that you made there, so just type that again. That'd be good. Now, the last thing I wanted to just do before we read the incantation and look ahead to next week, I just wanted to show you this image on screen here. This is there we go, and it's gonna move my face, but don't worry, who cares? I don't care. But yeah, this image here, this I think is a good image, a good breakdown of Mama Marimba Ani, of the whole book. Frankly, I should have read this. I should have looked at this a bit more carefully right at the beginning. But basically, you can't see my mouse, but you see the asili is at the bottom there. And then you've got the Utomawazo and Utomaroho. And what this image is trying to do, shout out to the artist who produced this for Mama Marimba Ani. This is trying to capture the interconnectivity of the Utomawazo and the Utomaroho. And you see there that the Utomawazo and Utomaroho work together to manifest the asili, which then creates those 7 boxes at the top there, which are basically, I believe these are basically the chapters of the book. And so out of the asili, out of the Utomawazo and Utomaroho come on the left there in the middle, the first box, institutionalized religion or Christianism with proselytizing, anti-nature, hierarchical, white supremacist, patriarchal, non-spiritual. And then you just work across there, all of those other ones. So ideology and values, the aesthetic, self-image, image of others, intracultural behavior towards others. And you'll see lots of crossover between those things. But one of the things I didn't say with regard to the behavior towards others, or one of the things I want to say is to talk about the rhetorical ethic, which is a very, very important section of the book, where Mama Marimba Ani basically says that when Europeans are talking about peace and human rights and all this sort of stuff, and turn the other cheek or whatever it might be, all of that stuff is not for them. They won't live according to those values that they claim to be promote, They are saying that to brainwash the rest of us so that we disarm and, fall for their trickery and don't identify their aggression for what it is. But yeah, if you do end up reading this book, if you haven't read it already or you reread it, I would probably suggest referring quite often back to this image to try and keep everything kind of in context. Because what you see there, you've got asili at the bottom. Maybe you can see my hand there. Where's my? Yeah, where are we? Yeah. So you got asili at the bottom there, but you've also got asili at the top there, and that's that. The asili both creates all of these manifestations, and then these manifestations reinforce the asili itself, if that makes sense. So, yeah, that's just a really good summary of what is an excellent book, frankly. And so that's that. I hope that was useful to the people then. And what I wanted to do, as I said, I wanted to read the incantation, which is on page. That's a good word, isn't it? Incantation. I used to be kind of scared of that word. It sounds like, spells and witches and evil and Satan. But that's just my brainwashing. Yeah. So here's the incantation I'm going to read. This is on page 9 of the Roman numeral section, the sort of preface of the book. So I'm going to close Marimba Ani's book. This is the last thing I'm going to say about this book by reading the incantation here. It says this. So incantation taught to me by Ama and Cambon, which is Kwame Kwe Ama and Kobe Cambon. 2,000 seasons of restless sleep beneath the destroyer's fragmented image. We used their definitions of ourselves to disconnect our consciousness, lines drawn in denial of deeply textured souls. Okra, ka, se, life, force, energy, nyama. They knew, even as we slept, that our spirit was more powerful than their white death. In our will-less sleep, we have allowed the earth to be defiled. The wake of 2,000 seasons of spiritless matter, destroyers' work. Confusion in Ma'afa aftermath. Within our lost knowledge, enemies have blurred the line between us and them. Are we destroyers ourselves? No, we are the spring water, compelled by ancestral consciousness, Egun and Samanfo. Issuing from Ani's womb, we divine a victorious destiny, Ifa, Odu. We are awakening, announcing ourselves, self-determining with Nubian will, crystal vision, shaping a new reality. Ancient genius rediscovered, so Dai, the clear word. Balancing the scales, restoring spirit to matter, the whole completed, made cosmic again. Rhythm is the key to the way. Alternating death with life, joining us to each other. We are the healers. The victory is ours. We call on Onyame, Oludumare, and Ama, invoking the Nomo power of blackness, carried in the genes of race memory, Hesse. Ancestors and children to be born, keys to the circles of connectedness and clarity. Africa redeemed, the universe in harmony, return and move forward to the way of a natural order, African world order, resplendent reflection of Ma'at. Ashe. Ashe, man. That's I won't break that down, but there's various elements of that which speak to what the book is all about, and speak to the job that we have at hand, which is to, particularly when it talks about the fragmented, this fragmented European worldview, which fragments everything, breaks everything down, labels things surface level, robs things of spirit, of interconnectivity. It cheapens the concept of humanness to the point where we're just supposed to be minds, where she talks a lot about how, because Europeans have cut themselves off so much from intuition and emotion and spirit, that they are unable to, they can't be happy. They can never be happy. They can never be mentally well. They can never be at peace. And our job as African people is to break away from that, break away, funnily enough, from this this destructive mindset of the Europeans and rebuild in connection with one another, rebuild propelled along and inspired by Egungun, which is the ancestors in Yoruba, I believe. And yeah, let's emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. Number ourselves can free our minds, you know. So yeah, that's me. That's Yurugu for me. Brilliant book. As I said, I've said a few times, I would have to read it again more slowly in order to really get the the goodness out of it. And I'm sure I'll refer back to it over and over and over again when as we carry on even doing future books. Now, a couple of comments here. Where are we? So yeah, pro black perspective. Mama Marimba Ani is top tier. Absolutely top tier scholar. Zizo, so you said, Zizo, interesting when they've come into context with melanin, that various views, and then I'll go back to your other comment. So yeah, so you said, sorry, thought I deleted it. I was going to mention off your comment about Americans, Europeans who have contact with melanin, Mediterraneans, Italians, Spanish, etc., often display improved holistic values. Yeah, really good point. Really good point. And it's funny because those same Europeans are seen as lower than the northern ones. So the Germans, when Greece, for example, was having its economic crises, I mean, they're still in the middle of it, but when they were having their, really convulsive crises 10 years ago or so, there was so much conversations about, why should the Germans help the Greeks? The Germans are prudent and keeping all their, saving and not being wasteful. But these bloody Greeks, they're just so wasteful. They're just no discipline. They just, So often you hear these kinds of things here in the UK, for example, with regard to Portugal, the pigs, they even call them the pigs. Portugal, Ireland, which is a bit of an outlier. But then Greece and Spain, these are these southern European countries, which funnily enough, especially Spain and Portugal were the pioneers in global domination. They're the ones who started all of this demonic European ma'afa that we're part of now. But obviously they got left behind by the Germans, the British, even the French to an extent. But yeah, that's an interesting. There's a good point, interesting point that these Southern Europeans definitely you see. I mean, I remember I went to Turkey a few years ago, and I swear down, the music I was hearing, this is Turkish music. It sounded like Afrobeats to me, and this is years and years ago, before Afrobeats has become all calm down, so I don't know. Anyway, yeah, good point, family. But yeah, having said that, everything's politics. That's a good point as well, because they are also extremely racist. Did I talk about my experience? I think I talked about my experience in Barcelona. I bloody hated it. I did not like being in Spain. I don't think I'd ever go to Italy, to be honest. I've seen enough to realize that they're very virulently racist. But I've met many Italian. I've worked with some Italians, and they're fine. But I don't really have any interest in going to any of those countries. Maybe Greece, just to check it out. Try and avoid the Golden Dawn, white supremacist fascists there and stuff like that. But anyway, it is what it is. And then everything's politics. They are, they do. They spearheaded it all, but then they got left behind. And I think part of their more virulent anti-blackness is probably because of that. Especially the Spanish. They were the Moors were dominating them for several hundred years. So yeah, that's the deal there. Thank you for the positive feedback. Yes, definitely. Everything's politics. Do buy the book, just even so it's on your shelf and you can dip in whenever you can. It's quite a task to read through it, but it's worth it, I think. And then Pro-Black Perspective. Thank you very much for today. The next books, nice segue there. The next book. So here we go. Next, pigs, Pigs, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. back 10 years ago or so, this is what they were being called in the Western Northern European media. So disrespectful. They could have called them like, I don't know, Spig or something, but they did it that way around. Right, next book. Next week, Saturday, should be same time, 8 o'clock. We're going to be reading, how do I do this so it doesn't glare? There you go, that's the best I can do. Kindezi, The Congo Art of Babysitting by Bunseki Fukiao and Lukondo Wamba. Now, just on the back of the book, they're the two there. Look at these 1980s pictures there. Oh, the 80s. Gosh. Anyway, that's the book there we're going to read. And the introduction was written by Marimba Ani. Marimba Ani has many good things to say about that book in the introduction. So that's only that book it's like a pamphlet. It's only 35 pages. So we're going to read that. And the point of reading that is to start to think about practical differences in the way that focus a little bit less on Europeans and a bit more on us as Africans, and some of the ways that we as Africans can start to or continue to or rediscover ways of being, ways of operating, ways of relating to people that are more in keeping with our asili, let's just say, more in keeping with our spiritual understanding, cosmological understanding, and so forth. So that's going to be a good one, babysitting, because I'm a father of 2 young boys under 5, 6, and when you become a parent, you realize that so much of what we do is so much of the advice that's out there, and so on. So much of the things that we do as parents. Oh, there's a moth in there. So many things that we do. Morning, I should say. Evening. Welcome. Karibu Sana, the cosmos and all that. So many things that we do as parents are, very Eurocentric. Hope that moth doesn't, it's going to fly in the thing and burn itself. Sorry. Then the next book we're going to read after that is this one, which is The Spirit of Intimacy, which is by Sobonfu Some. Can you see it? Yeah, Spirit of Intimacy by Sobonfu Some. This is all about relationships. Again, very important topic. How are we relating to each other as men and women, as partners, couples? That's what we're going to get into the following week. That's probably going to be 2 sessions because the book is 140 pages, although it's a very small book. So maybe we might be able to do it in together. So that is what we'll be doing for the next couple of weeks. So hope you guys have enjoyed. I know you guys have enjoyed these sessions we've been doing on Yurugu. I've really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed all of the comments and the input and so on. I'm glad we've got through it. I'm glad we've got the 11 sessions that we've done on Yurugu all in one playlist, and there for anyone to check them out whenever you want to check them out. So I'll see you guys next week. What I wanted to say as well, thanks for everyone who has signed up to my Substack, eliwananda.substack.com. If you haven't already, just head over there. All you got to do is just put your email address in, and then you'll be added to my email list. I don't send many emails to be honest, but it is a way for us to communicate and send updates and stuff when out away from just YouTube and Twitter, and yeah, that'll be all good. And on that note, I want to wish you a blessed rest of the evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Let's finish off this conversation here. Zizo, you said everything's politics. They need to be more racist to deny their contact and keep up with the North. Yeah. Not saying they're just exactly. Yeah. They're not better per se, but I agree. There's definitely more of you see more commonalities, I think, with them than I do certainly with Northern Europeans. But yeah, thanks guys. Asanteni sana, kwaherini, Mungu akubariki sana, and we'll see you next week. As soon as this finishes, it should take you to the next live stream, by the way. So if you could, please just go to the next live stream. Click like, click notify me as well, and then we're good. All right. Take care. Peace.